Hello, flag coaches. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. This message in this video will cover the 2020 Roanoke County Local League flag rules. If you've yet to do so, please watch the message to all coaches and players regarding the specific COVID-19 changes to our entire program. Again, this message will focus solely on the flag football specific rules and regulations. And I recommend you pause this video until you can pull up the local league rules to follow along. Thank you for getting those. I will go through and not read line by line because you're all grown-ups and I'm sure you'll have no problem reading on your own, but I do want to highlight specific things that always come up in questions at our typical in-person coaches meeting, as well as rule changes that we've made specifically for the 2020 season. The team formation piece is honestly a responsibility of your recreation club, but it does give you an understanding of how teams are formed and why they're formed the way that they are, as well as number limits and non-county residency issues and that type of thing. It also has the birth year requirements for players, as well as specific minimum and numbers. We could then go forward and talk about our equipment regulations. The big one that is a change for this year is all players, including the quarterback, must wear receiver gloves, and this prevents us from running into an issue where we have to sanitize the flags that are pulled for each player. So again, make sure all of your players know and your parents know that they need to have receiver gloves, and your quarterback needs to practice with receiver gloves as well, as because he will be required to throw with them. Obviously, the flag jersey must be worn at all times when playing, and we do ask that jerseys be tucked in so that the flag belts are easily seen. Make sure that everyone's aware we use the Wilson K2 ball in all age groups. This is the smallest youth football, and it allows most all of our divisions to be able to pass the ball appropriately. As far as our practice regulations go, we have changed our practices to 75 minutes, and we are asking teams to not deviate from their posted practice schedule dates and locations. Teams are in a pod this year, so they will only practice with and play with the same opponents throughout the course of a year. That way, in case there's ever a situation where we have to do contract tracing, we can easily look at a smaller number of teams as opposed to a randomness where a team may practice with in the same park or at a same facility with 5 or 6 teams. There's typically only going to be 1 or 2 other teams nearby. So please, if you aren't able to make a posted practice, just notify your coordinator so that we can cancel and delete offline if you or your coaches cannot. I do want to stress again, there is no switching of practice times with other teams. And we are also asking that no scrimmages take place during games. Again, that's what we covered in our COVID changes, scrimmages take place in practice, which is something that we covered in our COVID changes because we want to do our best to limit any unnecessary contact that's possible. The inclement weather policy is discussed. Make sure you understand the cancellation line and how it works. We'll post to that about 90 minutes before an activity. If the weather situation occurs inside of 90 minutes, more than likely the decision will be made at the field. You're responsible at your practices for administering the lightning policy, which is 30 minutes from a lightning strike. During games, site supervisors and officials will maintain that. And again, if you're in a situation where your practice and inclement weather situation comes up, whether it's hard rain, lightning, thunder, that kind of thing, please use your best judgment and cancel practices. The way our practice schedule is done at this point, that does not appear unless we get in a situation where we have multiple practices lost due to weather that we'll have the ability to reschedule lost practices. There is a concussion management protocol in place. We follow the National Federation of High Schools. There is a video that the CDC puts together that most of our recreation clubs require you to take. That is linked there. This is basically the when in doubt, sit them out rule. So if you have a player that takes a hard fall or displays what is any basic suspected concussion symptom, you're asked to sit that player out, get them to their parents so they can get the appropriate medical clearance to return to play. Remember, if you suspect a player has a concussion or shouldn't play, the parent cannot override your authority and mandate that you put the child back in. Another thing to consider as a local volunteer, just like teachers, Sunday school teachers, Boy Scout troop leaders, you are a mandated reporter as a youth sport coach. So anytime you suspect child abuse takes place with someone on your team, it is your responsibility to notify the Department of Social Services. This is not a Roanoke County rule. This is a Commonwealth regulation we want to make sure you're aware of. Your satisfaction of this does not include letting a coordinator know and having them report it. Please remember that you have to report it directly or you can be held liable. The basic game is what I tell everybody, that if 80% or 90% of your players and parents can understand this, that will get you into the ballpark. We talk about who wears the home jersey, the reversible white jersey, when we start a game, how the game is played, all of those basic things. Again, in our 6U program, our 8U program, our younger program, we strongly recommend that you teach these basic fundamentals and actually explain them to your parents as well. Because if you can do this basic, you can let the officials call everything else, and you guys will have an understanding of how to play the game. Our fields are traditionally smaller than a tackle football field. They're 30 yards by 70 yards. You will see no run zones that are marked with 5 yards before the either midfield line or goal line. If the ball is spotted in there during a play, you would not be able to run a run play through that. You actually have to run a pass play to score a touchdown. Doesn't mean if you start at one end of the field, you have to pause at the no run zone or pause at the goal line when you're going into it. It just means if the ball is spotted, and that prevents really a power running play where you're hoping a player can get 1 or 2 yards without getting their flag pulled. So it's just one step that the NFL flag program has put in to help reduce some of the contact. Our schedules are all going to be posted online. We hope to have them online next week. Practice schedules are already there, but the pregame information talks a little bit about starting the game, who's providing the home field, what your responsibility as a coach, the timing and clock regulations. Our games are 48 minutes long. There's 2 24-minute halves, and each half is broken up into a 6-minute mini quarter. There's a 30-second play clock to get the ball off, and each team has 1 60-second timeout per half. We do allow the officials to stop the clock at their discretion if there's an injury or a situation occurs. If a game gets 1 half of play in, the game will be considered final and will not be rescheduled at a later time. We will do our best if a situation occurs, lightning, rain, where a game can't get played, to replay that at a later date. There is an all-play rule. Our flag football program has historically been great at abiding by this. We just need to make sure you develop a play cycle for all your players that gets each player the mandatory 4 6-minute mini quarters for each game, as well as the additional 2 6-minute mini quarters where players actually have to sit. And that prevents you from getting a bad rap because your son may or parent may feel as though your child doesn't come out of the game. Every child is required to play 4 and sit 2. If a player gets hurt during a mini quarter, they should go back in as soon as possible, but it does count for their play time, very similar to our basketball program. Section E will talk about the live and dead ball as far as when that is. Basically, a ball is dead when it hits the ground, so there's no fumble. If the ball ever is fumbled, then it's automatically down at that point to prevent the situation where folks are piling on. If the flag is pulled, the player steps out of bounds, a touchdown or a safety is scored, the ball carrier falls down, a flag falls out. So you need to make sure your players, and you spend the first part of your practice learning how to put the flags back in, or a 7-second pass clock. When the ball is snapped, the quarterback has 7 seconds to either run or pass the ball, basically cross the line of scrimmage. After 7 seconds, the play is run dead. What happens with an inadvertent whistle? As far as running goes, again, I'm not going to read all this, just highlight a couple. The quarterback does have the ability to ball. In flag football, the quarterback is determined as to be the offensive player that receives the snap. As you get creative with your play calling, that might look a little different, but I'll let you guys figure that out on your own. But basically, whoever receives the snap is the quarterback and has the ability to run the ball. There is no lateral or pitches, so you cannot run an option. Note that it doesn't say a backward pass, so keep that in mind when you're coming up with your play time, your plays. Flag obstruction is always the biggest thing, and it's the biggest complaint we get each year. Please make sure your jerseys stay tucked inside the flag belt so that the flag belts are easily pulled, and players do not have the ability to stiff arm or do anything as it relates to trying to prevent someone from getting their flag other than, zigging, zagging, spinning, that type of thing. Go through and talk a little bit about what passes are allowed, what passes are not. Another thing, as far as receivers go, we only allow one player in motion at any time. The motion has to be parallel, and you can't run toward the line of scrimmage. Basically, the Canadian football rule, for lack of a better word. Interceptions, should they occur, are returnable. It's not highlighted, but it always seems to come up. If a player catches it, pick six is perfectly permitted. As far as the rushing of the passer, we do allow one person to rush the quarterback. The rusher must, however, start 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage, so they can't start on the 7-yard lines and go from there. Once the ball is handed off or a pass is attempted, the 7-yard rule is no longer in effect and players are free to run. Typically, the referee will designate on the defensive side where the 7-yard is, either with a beanbag, or actually with their lineup, and they'll communicate to your players appropriately. Talks a little bit about what happens when someone illegal rushes and goes from there. Flag pulling, again, what it looks like. Defenders cannot dive at flags. They can dive, but they can't tackle, run through a ball carrier. Please keep that in mind. There is no stripping or foot of the football. Again, folks need to work us on pulling flags, and it's not to hold up players. And a defensive player may not intentionally pull the flags of another player that doesn't have the ball. So that's always seems to be a big thing when folks are getting creative in their offensive play calls. Defensive players just can't go through and start the play by pulling the flag of everybody and says, okay, they're out. Again, we talk specifically what flag guarding is, and so please work through taking care of that. We talk a lot bit here about our formation, what unsportsmanlike conduct is, and the penalties. Basically, we have simplified our penalties to the best that we can. Defensive penalties typically result in either 5 yards from the line of scrimmage or a foul and an automatic first down. Offensive penalties, conversely, is typically -5 yards and loss of down. So we're not getting into what's 5, what's 10, what's 15, and what goes along with each one. Again, those are just a brief overview. Feel free to reach out to your flag football coordinator if you have rule-specific questions. We just kind of wanted to give the broad strokes. Again, please make sure you've watched the COVID-specific regulations as it relates to flag football, and feel free to reach out to your coordinator. We hope you guys have a fun and safe season, and if we can do anything for you, let us know. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you out at the fields.